Hello, and welcome to another pulse-pounding episode of Morganza. I'm your host, Dale Morgan, and in our next 3 episodes, I'll be talking with singer-songwriter Richard Goldman about an album he put out almost 30 years ago that I really love. We'll be hearing about how the album came to be, listening to excerpts, hearing Richard's reflections on each track, and, as an extra special treat, the end of the second and third episodes will feature exclusive performances of songs from the album. So let's get started with part 1, where Richard talks about the album and how it came to be and shares some wacky tales from his storied showbiz career. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoy the show. Lots of us have stories about events in our lives that maybe nudge our musical tastes in a certain direction. And today I want to tell you about one of mine. In the early 2000s, I was working in IT at a major American telecom company. And one day, I don't know how, I came across an internal website that contained digital music files from what looked like the entire catalogs of a couple of very small record labels. And now this was during the very early days of digital music file sharing. So this was something relatively new for me. The only legitimate reason I could think these files might have been floating around on an internal corporate server is that it's possible they were the product of research into audio compression techniques, which is something that I'm guessing a telecom company would be interested in. At any rate, being the inquisitive guy I am, I think over time I probably listened at work to all of these albums, and in the process I became a fan of a number of artists that I'd never heard of before, including, and I recommend you check all these out, Margot Hennebach, Five Chinese Brothers, Annie Gallup, Christine Lavin, David Wilcox, Jack Hardy, Jerry Devine and the High Beams, Jason Eklund, Rod McDonald, Julie Gold, and last but not least, our distinguished guest today, and the artist behind the seminal 1997 release, Girls and Cows, soon to celebrate its 30th anniversary, the prolific, multi-talented Hollywood singer-songwriter, Mr. Richard Goldman. Yay! Richard, how are you doing?
Lovely. Thank you so much for the lovely intro.
So set the stage for us. This album came out in 1997. Where were you? Where did you come from? What was going on at the time? And how did this album come to be?
One of the things that's interesting is that so when you found me, you were sending me like New Year's greetings.
It's true.
Richard. And I was in the beginning at that point of suddenly, out of nowhere, for no particular reason, having fans. It had
Oh, really?
This weird thing happened to me back in the beginning of my career, and it has happily followed me. A lot of kids, 20-year-olds, are listening to my stuff now because it's in this genre that they love, Laurel Canyon, yacht rock. It's a world. And when you watch movies, you hear songs that sound a little like me singing. It's like this sort of. I was part of a certain early 70s sound. And so I suddenly, out of nowhere, in my 60s, started to have fans, and you were one of them.
Wow.
And your story was just the oddest.
It is pretty odd.
It just picked up this one record, and you found my music, and then you reached out to me, and we just do like once a year. I had no idea how old you were or anything like that.
Right.
But all of a sudden, I had these other fans, these 20-year-olds that were falling in love with my songs from when I was 25. You fell in love with my songs when I was 47, and I was. Clearly, I think I was a much better artist by Girls and Cows than I was in my 20s. I knew what I was doing, as opposed to just sort of, doing it. I would also say to you that you're doing this with you has pushed my interest in my own, music from that era
Hmm.
So I'm re-falling in love with, some songs I wrote at a certain age, and sometimes they're almost like kids. It's like, that you had this relationship with, at a certain time, and now you've grown up, they've grown up, there's something else, or forgotten sometimes with songs. But anyway,
Right.
this has been very fun to rediscover my own music from when I was 47 years old. Okay. Now, what was I doing at the time when I was 47? This happened completely out of nowhere, that I would get a record deal with a small folk label in Vermont. I lived in Los Angeles. I worked in television and film as a writer mostly, sometimes researching questions for game shows, other things like that, but all, involved in the arts, um, and stuff. Probably around 1997, I was a dad of a 6-year old and one on the way. We were expecting when Girls and Cows was actually being recorded, and our second and last child. And that's, I think, kind of where I was at the time, working on a thing that would be a movie that would happen around. The movie never came out, but we got paid, and that was important. That helped. And
Yeah.
so, does that answer? Did I leave anything out?
That's a good start. You were not a native Californian, though. You came from New York, right?
That's correct. I come
And
I come from the New York.
right,
Yeah.
and that you had hightailed it out to California um, I- during your college years, your college year,
Mhm.
your college semester, after your college semester.
Correct. How did that? Well, so I guess I got to college in Beloit, Wisconsin, and I did
Oh,
love the mid. It was my first real trip to the Midwest. I'm the youngest of three. Both my brothers had gone to Midwestern colleges. One to
nice.
Michigan State and one to Ohio Wesleyan. And I went to Beloit, Wisconsin, and it was lovely there.
Yeah.
But I couldn't focus. I couldn't read things. I think I had become a good enough singer-songwriter, and at that point in time, that this is what I want to do, and this is a stupid time to be going to college. I should be doing it, and so I dropped out of school, went back home, worked for about a year, took my music to New York City publishers, who all said I would do better taking my music to Los Angeles publishers. And so you hear that. I heard that enough, and that got me to go, okay, I'm going to get out to California. A friend that I was in a band with, his parents had just moved out there, so I had a place to stay. We used to always practice at their house, so I was kind of like a adopted kid at some point.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's about where I was at that point in time. And
So you had been writing songs since the age of 14, is that right?
yep, and
Yeah,
it was very directly related to the Beatles and that
right,
moment in time. It
right,
was it
right.
was within a month after that I wrote my first few songs. You had asked me about something uh, a ways back there,
Uh-huh.
in just chatting and just emails. You had asked me about, like, what was the first song, and that's a bit that it was so it that one is so clear. It was Dylan's "Hard Rain,"
Ah.
which 3 chords, and and my guitar. My oldest brother had tuned my guitar to a chord for some reason and said, "This is how you play," and it was open tuning. It was like Joni Mitchell E tuning. and
Uh-huh.
so I learned just how to bar the chords and get, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard. It's like a 1 4 5, Dylan song, and I howled that out for a while, and that one really just got me started.
Uh-huh.
I
And the
couldn't.
Beatles too. So what
Yeah,
was
the
the
Beatles,
Beatles?
the Beatles, of
Right.
course, but I couldn't really play any, and nothing was as simple Beatle wise,
Right.
even at that time. Yeah,
So you were 14, you were 14 when
yeah.
the Beatles hit Ed Sullivan, right?
Prior to that, I would stand in front of my like full length mirror that was on in the closet in my bedroom,
Hmm.
and listen to Bobby V, or and basically double the vocals of Ricky Nelson, Bobby V, and da, 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 da. I could move my jaw a little bit, like, I'm sure I used to run around the park. Yeah, like that. So I would
Great.
work on my Ricky Nelsons and Bobby V's and stuff. So the Beatles didn't completely wake me up, but the Beatles just made me say, "This is what I want to do. This get
Hmm.
out, girls." Yeah. So it was the first 100 songs were all about literally one girl who
Oh,
would,
wow.
wouldn't give me a toss at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. So did you perform? Were you performing at this in high school?
I was performing in high school
Outside of in front of the mirror?
yes, yes.
Yeah,
By the
on
time
stage.
I'm 16, I'm performing. I'm in local bands. Yeah, that
Oh, good.
were my bands kind of thing, because I was the uh, kind of the jukebox kid. I could play any song, and so mostly, I would find people that like British rock, and we would do British rock songs,
Hmm.
and,
Hmm.
and play for parties and this and that. Um, so yeah, I did play in high school is the answer, and I ran, and in my senior year, I ran the
Right.
church. It was in a church, and it was like a coffee house, and there would be I'd get about 6 people to play, and somehow each time one of them would be me, and I took over this thing from the older brother who had of the kid who would get me the girls and cows. So, in other words, Richard Meyer, who was responsible for getting my tapes to the record company in Vermont, his
Hmm.
older brother handed down the high school kind of coffee shop to me. Okay, said it's yours this year, and so I had a thing with that his family. So there's a little connection there to girls and cows and this and that.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
Anyway,
Okay.
I thought I'd share that with you. I think
I
it
appreciate
is
that.
interesting.
It is interesting.
Also, there's a really good story in there
Oh,
with
good.
this one guy. Okay, so I think it was near the end of senior year. He had already graduated. He said so. It was before the summer, and he said, going down to the city. I'm going to play. So it was like I think it was a middle of the week thing. We were going, and he invited me to come down with him to the Greenwich Village. We lived in New Rochelle, a suburb just beyond the Bronx, and it would take us about 20 minutes to get to New York by train, and then get down to the village another 10 minutes by subway. And so we did that, and we played, and there was this third who joined us. That would be a fellow named Don McLean, who who had went to New Rochelle High School and had known this Doug Meyer. He's the older Meyer brother. So Don McLean, Doug Meyer, and I go to the village to play. I think Gerde's Folk City on
Hmm.
a night. I don't know who Don McLean is, by the way. He has
What?
kind of I'd never heard of him. He has kind of rock star hair, and he's playing at that point in time. He was doing Hudson River concerts with Pete Seeger, so he was more of a somebody at that point in time. He was a recognizable somebody in the village, and not to me, but to other people when we got there.
All right. So
Anyway, he helped us all get on that night, okay, at Gerde's Folk City.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Simon's younger brother heard one of my songs. His name was Eddie Simon, who looked just like Paul. And so we are in around, like, I guess, get you back in 1968. So Eddie Simon offers me $100 for one of my songs that I played that night. And he said, I really want to play it for Paul, and I'm starting a little publishing company, and da 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 da. And, if you just want to, quick thing here. It was Don McLean who said, no, 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 no. Who was like 3-4 years older than me, going, Richard, no, 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 no. So I of course, I don't, whether Don or anybody was there, I don't think I would have done this. But yeah, no. So anyway,
wow, that's quite a story.
that was that. And on the way home, we finally talked. On the way there, neither one of them chatted with me. I was just some, who the hell is he? Why is he even with us? And then on the way home, I was, because that thing had happened with Eddie Simon. Suddenly we were talking music, and Don dropped the load on me. Okay. And this was like the weirdest thing. It was so Don had a load, and he had a strong resentment to all of what had happened in the 1960s to music, pop music. And so he was the Beatles screwed. Well, the Beatles messed up rock and roll. The Stones can't play. He would just run down the list of things that were like, and it's like dude couldn't hear this music. Dylan had betrayed them. He went through the whole thing that his greatest song is all about. It was like his rant, and because basically he had asked me that question of like, well, who do you listen to? And I'm like, the Beatles, the Kinks, and this and that. But at any rate, that's the story that had something to do with my high school. It was the end. It was the end of my high school. At any rate, it was a funny story, and
That's
really, it
really
was like,
good.
what was the one thing you don't want to say to Don McLean? If you meet him, you don't go on about the Beatles, the Stones, and the Kings.
Well,
Okay.
well, it seems to me he was hanging around Pete Seeger too long. It's really
Eh,
kind
eh,
of drank the
There's
Pete Seeger
probably a
Kool-Aid.
lot of that. There was so
Yeah,
much resentment to what Dylan had sort of done
right.
to the folk movement, which is crazy because it had, given the world lyrics.
Hmm.
It made the Beatles want to write songs that had interesting words, and that
Yeah.
were a little bit more than I want to hold your hand.
All right. So you're 47. So this you
47 when I made it. Yeah.
you
Oh,
connect
yeah.
with Gadfly. These songs predated the album, though, right? They went back
Most of
some
them,
way.
yes, were. Um, he liked a certain style of songs, so I kept showing him songs that were in that style, that were sort of funny, sarcastic, witty, that kind of thing.
So this is the cover art. Now you were showing me some original cover art.
Yeah, I got an original,
All right, let me see
but
it.
that is the cover. Turn it around so that
All
they
right,
can see
this
the
is the
back.
back,
Yeah,
and a
my
beautiful
wife did that.
illustration there
The wife did
with
that
you
illustration.
with you drowning in the background here.
Hmm. And the
Hmm.
front part is also my wife's work. She's
Right.
in that picture.
And who came up with the title?
And that would be me. And that would be because here's the original. Accentuate the negative. For some reason, people thought my music was a little negative sometimes.
I can't imagine that.
My mother was very negative. If you expect the worst, darling, you will always be surprised when it doesn't happen. And so, yeah, no.
True.
So accentuate the negative. I was 47, and and so yeah, there's that.
Mm-hmm.
And puns, which were my strength. I realized I didn't want to see that a pun on the album cover. I thought that was like I would get
right.
It would grow old.
And there is one song about cows,
and 14 songs about girls.
All right. Yep.
Hence the girls and cows.
Yeah, makes sense. So why don't we run through the song list? There's 15 tracks.
Before you start, how would you describe the overall sound of the record?
It is very Beatlesque, the harmonies and just the overall feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, most of it very humorous.
And do you have other, like let's say Randy Newman? Do you have other people who are similar to Richard Goldman?
That's a good question.
In terms of being a fan of.
Well, I do. I like Randy Newman. I was listening to him just the other day and thinking about how great he was.
And he was a huge influence.
Yeah.
The very first thing of 12 songs is wonderful, but I mean the Good Old Boys, that record, I guess around 73, that is just, each song is genius.
Yeah. And then he kind of started out in movie music. Did you ever do movie music?
He came from his cousin of his was a brilliant composer in the 40s, and then he trends somewhere in the mid 70s. He started getting work, doing that.
But then he kind of went back to scoring music.
So I never really did compose that much or think of myself as a composer. I just thought of myself as a wise guy who was sort of entertaining myself. I mean, I have over the last few years, Dale, I have been working. I've been writing about my life and writing about the song, my songs. And collecting the first demos. I love demos more than I love worked on things because they're just a bit looser, and they're also the first pass at the song. So there's a little more excitement really in everything. The playing of everything.
And what are you recording on? So your demos. So you started out probably on cassette or something, right? Or
I started out on reel to reel.
Reel to reel.
Yeah, no, I was and stayed with reel to reel until around 1980, and I start doing things on cassette just because it's easier.
Right.
And then in the mid 80s, I get into a TAC 4-track cassette, which literally changed everything, being able to have 4 tracks so I could do 3 things, then mix them down like the Beatles did
right
track, and now have 3 open tracks, to add overdub whatever I wanted to do. So I was 20 years behind the Beatles in terms of technology, but I was at least at home. And after that, the TAC thing, I think I start working on with my friend at his house on a Korg, and that was just now we're beginning to be digital there. And
this is on what? What did you say?
I'm working on a Korg in the late 80s on a Korg, a keyboard, computer-ish thing. So that they weren't exactly files. You had to get them off the Korg to turn them and put them on tape. And And then came DAT, and I in the mid '90s,
Right.
which was around for like a minute or two, and they were
Right.
hoping, well, maybe I guess the tape people were hoping, the audio, because yeah, digital DAT is digital audio transfer, and so the digital and the audio were trying to work together there. That the past was hoping it could be dragged into the digital future together, but it didn't
Right.
work out for DAT that way. By the time home computers and garage bands, Pro Tools literally changed the world. And
Right. Right. But you
so I
retired
got
now,
to,
are you?
there were a lot of different ways of doing home demos, and
Yeah. Yeah.
from reel to reel,
Yeah.
all the way up
All the way
to,
to
yeah.
computer. Yep.
As a songwriter, I kind of, resented having to be the engineer all the time and stuff, but it was a good thing to learn over the
Yeah.
years. And
Yeah.
and after a while, you're not, you know, you things are going to go wrong when you record, and you just have to learn to, you know, not
Yeah.
hold on to them.
And are you still recording today? Are you still writing and
No,
recording?
no,
No.
there are certain things I don't do anymore, and that is definitely one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I for a couple of reasons, but mostly because I have an old computer that doesn't have GarageBand, and we were building a house and just doing other things, and
Mhm.
money went to decks and stuff like that, and not to new computers and this.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Kind
hear
of
you.
my answer to that question. If a song comes to me, I will sing it to my phone, which does a wonderful job of recording it. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
So they come to me. They're not, they're usually mean.
Oh boy.
Mhm.
Oh well.
But so yes,
Accentuate the
and
negatives, I say.
yes, I still write. No, I don't really record, and when I do, it's just going to be a live recording, whether I sit at the piano and play a song for, yeah, and record it
So
that
what
way.
did you say you're writing? Are you writing like an autobiography or memoirs or?
I would say I'm writing a memoir, yeah,
Oh,
and
that's good.
been in progress, and I keep getting better at the writing part, because that's,
Right.
songwriting is kind of something I know how to do. Writing about your life is something I don't know, and I keep learning. I think the best thing I've learned about, and it's good to say before we start going into the songs, the best thing I learned is that I was talking to, well, I don't know if I need that part of the story, but my the other grandfather in our grandchild. We were talking about growing up, and we both found out that we were terrible liars when we were like 8, 9, 10, 11, and I would tell. So I admitted to telling all these. And what was really interesting is that I stopped trying to inflate myself through stories at the exact age that I start writing songs, and that
Wow.
and those songs are all lies. So it's like I found a direction, or I found an outlet. That's the word, for telling tall tales,
Uh-huh. Right.
and it because it really does. I become, because my I had two older brothers who used to cheat me in sports all the time. I became the most honest sporting person I knew. And when I grew up, I would be playing softball games with grown-ups with that I was at that time, and so in other words, it would be like a pickup softball game, but they need an umpire, and I was always the one that everybody always chose because I
Uh,
was the fairest guy. Well, so this is a kid that just used to lie about everything, and as soon as I started writing songs, they became my lies, and I was
that's very
and they
interesting.
became complete bullshit. And if you believe this, so that's still part of girls and cows. I mean, I at some point fancy myself someone who can, say mean things about their neighbor and get away with it. That's part of the of who I am. I think that I have this little place where I can go and tell stories that aren't necessarily true.
Yeah.
And
Good.
that's
That's interesting.
basically my writing style. And that's basically, there are 15 little stories like that on Girls and Cows.
That's all for this time. Be sure to join me for part 2 of my conversation with Richard Goldman, coming soon. And in the meantime, give Richard a listen on your favorite streaming service and check him out on SoundCloud, where you'll find literally hundreds of the demos Richard's recorded over the years. Bye for now. See you next time on Morganza.